Well, here's the third part of our video about college rugby stuff and sort of really the competition breakdown as to what's what and who's who and things like that. We're into the women's competition, and there is a bunch of stuff to talk about with regard to how women's college rugby is organized. And so you as a student athlete or you as a fan can sort of know what's going on. And when somebody says, and this is kind of a big thing for me, it's been a big thing for me in a number of different competitions, but if somebody says to you, hey, we are one of the best rugby teams in the country, or we're the best in the country, what does that mean? So women's rugby is split along divisional lines, but it's also split along oversight lines, as men are, but split into three. So we have a CRAA group, which incorporates D1 Elite, but also has a Division I competition. We have NYRA, NCAA varsity programs. It's still an emerging sport. It's not a full NCAA sport because they haven't reached the threshold of the number of programs that are needed. We'll talk about that a little bit. And then we have NCR, which has also divisional splits. So we could talk about some of that overall. Let's talk about NCR first. And it's pretty clear NCR has the vast majority of women's rugby programs in the country. That wasn't true like 2 years ago, but there has been a fairly strong shift over from ACRA, which doesn't really operate anymore, and CRAA, especially this spring, we've heard about the teams from the Northeast and the teams from the Colorado area have moved over to NCR. Why? Well, there are two major reasons for this. Number one is seasonality. CRAA has had a fall championship in Women's Division I and a spring championship. And NCR has a fall championship. So you're looking around, especially if you're the Northeast teams, you're saying, but, I mean, we could play those guys, and we could play those guys, we could play those guys, and if we were in NCR, we could play all of them. So that's one major reason. And I think one of the bigger driving reasons for a lot of changes in any competition is teams look around and say, what are the right teams for us to play, and where are they, and are they nearby? So that also goes hand in hand with with seasonality. These are teams that are playing for a championship in the fall anyway. So they say, well, why don't we all play in the fall, and we think we can win it. And I think that there's certainly a feeling that when Northeastern blew the doors off everybody to win CRAA's fall championship, they looked around and said, we could beat Michigan. And I'm quite sure that Michigan looked and said, we could beat Northeastern. So let's settle that, right? So sometimes, we have all these different championships. Well, let's consolidate one. So I think that's where we're going along those lines. The other thing is about sort of the like-minded nature of pretty much the entire NCR landscape. They're club teams. There are one or two exceptions to that. Notre Dame College, which will be shifting to Walsh University, because Notre Dame College has closed its doors, the university closed its doors. Notre Dame College made the women's D1 final last 2 years. They're a school-supported team. But for the last several years, this has been a club competition. Now we're seeing a couple of school-supported programs shift over. So Adrian is coming into NCR D1. I think it's because they want to win a championship. So we'll see about that. The emergence of Southern Nazarene, that's a school-supported program, men and women. We'll see that. And we'll see the emergence of one or two other school-supported programs within the women's landscape. That might bring up a conversation later as to what NCR does about that. But for the vast majority, NCR is club teams. Now, it mean there are more challenges in terms of funding, for sure, organization, stuff like that, respect on campus, all that stuff. That we all know that. I mean, most of us, anybody my age who played college rugby knows that they played in a club program. But a club program can be really useful, really cool. And I stole this notion from Laura Miller, coach who's now coaching at Bowdoin, and Karen Fong Donahue, who runs Rutgers Edge. I think both of them sort of talked about this concept, the idea that if you're in a club program, you get so much experience to put on your resume. You can be the scheduling director and the treasurer and the vice president, the president of the club, and do all this organizational stuff. In most clubs, many clubs anyway, the university only talks to the students who run the club. They don't talk to the coach. So this can all be really useful to you just in life. It's also, hey, it's rugby. It's great if it's well run. You've got a good coach. You've got some funding from alumni or parents, whatever it is. You can create something great and meaningful and fantastic, and you have a great team. There's no doubt about that. What Michigan has been doing, that's terrific, because they've been able to win championships as a club team that probably doesn't get a lot of respect on campus, But just know what you're getting into. Understand what that is. Whether it's Division 1, Division 2 is fantastic under NCR. It's pretty much everybody and very competitive. Small college, still very important, still very meaningful. Yes, we've changed it to Division 3. We'll see how that changes things overall, but they're smaller colleges. But if somebody comes to you and says, University of Michigan is the best women's college rugby team in the country, they're not correct. It's not true. Because there are different levels, and if you ask anybody who did really well in NCRD 1, you want to play these guys, you want to play them, they won't want to do it. So that's a reality. That's a reality. There's also realities like if you want to be high level, if you want to be a player who challenges to get on the national team, you have to do a lot more in terms of getting yourself games. Because a lot of these leagues are playing 4 or 5, maybe 6 games, league games in a season, get the playoffs maybe, stuff like that. I've gone to playoffs, I've talked to the players, there are a lot of really good rugby players there, players who are also in a position to say they're an elite athlete, taller than average, stronger than average, faster than average, a combination of those, way faster than average, work rate, fitness, all those things. You just don't see a lot of that in the club game. That's not a criticism, it's just a fact of how it goes. So if you are one of those people who's up there, you have to work harder and harder and harder to get through, to be seen. You have to get on all-star teams, you have to go elsewhere, and you have to spend your spring not playing sevens tournaments that kind of don't mean a lot and won't be able to showcase what you do. Okay, that's what you got in NCR, and that is most college rugby. So if you're a high school player and you're saying, I want to play meaningful college rugby, understand when you're in NCR not only who you'll be playing for, but who you'll be playing against. And I might also point out, I've heard this from young players, from high school girl players who say, I don't know if I'm good enough to play Division 1 rugby. Well, Division 1 does not mean like Division 1 NCAA sports in most examples. In NCR, you can be on a club team. So yeah, you're good enough. If you know what you're doing, if you've played a few games, right, you should be able to show up and be able to function, and then see if you can get better and better. And if you're on a really, really good team, yes, it might be difficult to get on that team as a freshman. But generally, you show up and you've been playing for 3 or 4 years on a good high school team, and you go to a club team, you will be one of the better team players on that team. Okay, that's that group. I want to talk about D1 Elite a little bit later, but still staying in the club sphere, CRAA has their own club group. And they've had a spring playoff, and that's been kind of a weird one because we've seen the big thing last year not this past spring, the spring before, and the spring before that, was teams, specifically one team didn't want to play in the playoff, didn't approve of the way the playoff was put together, partly because BYU was in it. And BYU certainly seemed like a school-supported team that was not in a club situation. And we do have some gray area here. We have that was Virginia, and Virginia left and went to NCR, but we saw Virginia back into CRAA playoffs this spring. Why? Well, I kind of think they like to play in 15s a little bit more, as much as anything else. But you see club teams that are well run and well supported in some way or other. Maybe the administration is just nicer to them. Maybe there's alumni support, things like that. So that culminated this past spring, Stanford playing Grand Canyon University. Now, Grand Canyon, I have been talking about them as a D1 elite team. They're on a gray area. That's what they were. They were winless in D1 elite. So they funneled into the D1 playoffs. They made the final. Stanford beat them. So a club team beat a school-supported team. Now, Stanford was for many years one of the two programs that you would say was the standard of women's college rugby. Stanford and Penn State were playing each other in the final pretty much every year. Then they sort of dropped off, not because necessarily they got worse, but a combination of the acceptance rates for all of these kinds of prestige schools dropping like a stone from, it used to be really selective, would be 15% down to like 4%, things like that. And players now starting to get recruited for school-supported teams. So, yeah, but they're coming back, and they played great, and that's really good news. Is Stanford better than Michigan? I'm not going to tell you what I think of that, but I would like to see the game. That would be kind of fun. And I think, actually, in the grand scheme, as people talk about this in terms of college sports in general, you could sell Stanford versus Michigan, right? You can sell that. But that's a fairly small group, not tiny, but small. We've got the likes of Western Washington, who won the Sevens Club Championship for CRAA. You've got teams like Oregon, used to be really, really strong. They're still in there. They're still in the conversation. Stanford, Cal, UC Santa Barbara, UCLA, Arizona State. People like that. Claremont Colleges had been winning comfortably the Division II, moved up to D1 and did really well. Made the playoffs, but didn't win it. But still, Claremont Colleges. That's a really good success story. So you've got that West Coast, and I think that's going to stay that because they're going to play in this break, and this is one of the facts we see within the men's sphere and also in the women's sphere. West Coast, they're going to stay playing winter to spring. They just will. There's no way you're going to see them change, partly because of the weather, partly because they like doing what they like doing, but it's also because for several schools, if you squeeze them at both ends if you start and play only 15s in the fall, because several of them start fairly late because it's quite hot in August, and so they start late, and they do their scheduling differently. So they might have to jump, and you hear this story. Oh no, we had no preseason game. You had to jump right into league play. And the other thing is, of course, the playoff scenario. That if the playoffs wrap up for the women in NCR a week earlier than they do for the men, by the way. So they wrap up basically late November. That means that you're kind of done if you don't make the playoffs in mid-October. Well, if you're in California, you're looking around going, it's the perfect time to be playing rugby. What are we doing? So they'll play all the way through. They'll play happily in November and December, take a break, come back, continue to play. Why wouldn't you do that? If you had the weather your way, why wouldn't you do that? So that's why that's probably going to stay that way. I may be wrong about that because I've been wrong about a few things. And a lot of women's teams are moving to NCR, but there's that.